Hey all, Nick's here. I just wanted to do a little thing on Act 3 here. Um, so, once you get into Act 3, you'll want to get up to level 26.5 or 27-ish. Or 28 if you plan on rushing straight to docks and not doing the rest of the act, but I'll explain a little bit there. Once you get to town, you can log out, log back in. It skips the entire run around the city. It saves a little bit of time if your load times are fast, or if your load times are slow, I suppose it wastes you a ton of time. We exit into Sarn slums. We want to find Clarissa, ideally first, but Act 3 is an entire zone of do things as they become available to you, if you want to be as quick as possible. You can spawn on the southwest or the southeast side of town. Clarissa will usually be on the opposite one, but not always. Act 3 is very much about things that usually happen, but not always. So it can make speedrunning very, very awkward. If you find the warehouse sewers, you can drop a town portal if you want to return there without doing Crematorium. I decided at this point that it's better to do Crematorium first. The reason I do this is because I want to do the skill point reward quest, so I have to go into the slum sewers anyways. If you drop one at warehouse entrance, you can hit up warehouse, find the sewers there, take TP back, and then do all the other stuff. That can save you a bit of time because it gives you the warehouse sewers right off the bat. And you don't have to run back to the warehouse sewers a second time, or the warehouse entrance a second time, but I decided to do it anyways. General zones for general tips for Crematorium. Obviously, equip a fire resist ring, and necros are annoying. When you get to Piety, equip a lightning resist ring. Of course, easy things. You can also get Clarissa first if you want, but if you find Crematorium, do Crematorium first, because obviously that way you don't have to backtrack. Typically, you want to backtrack as little as possible in Act 3, because it is a zone that encourages backtracking. So the best way to speedrun it is to avoid that as much as possible. So once you get Piety to half, Tolman's Bracelet spawns. Now we need to find Clarissa, because I need to find the Sarn Sewer Slum entrance. Sarn Slum Sewer. Yeah. And get there. So we find Clarissa. Clarissa is usually always on the outside, so just circle around the outside, find her. Once you free her, you have to go back to town to get her bracelet, key, chain thing. Then we have to find the sewers. The sewer entrance is usually in the middle of the map, and is usually very close to town. Again, usually. There have been incidents where those things have not been the case, but 9 times out of 10, those things will be true. Otherwise, sewers is fairly simple. There are 2 exits into warehouse sewers and 1 bust. We need the bust. If you can decide whether it's worth it to try and find the other entrance or backtrack to the first one if you wind up in a situation like mine there. Typically the experience is good, so it's not like a bad idea to clear the rest of the zone, but I mean, if you're trying to do a speedrun, it's obviously a waste of time. The Flicker Strike mobs deal lightning damage with their power charged explosion, so a lightning resist ring will save you a lot of headache. Now that we have the warehouse sewers waypoint, which is always located on the west side of the map, we want to find the exit, so we just circle around the zone until we find it. Now we're in warehouses. Again, lightning resist is good here. I had a little bit of desync there, so it adds a couple of minutes onto the run, no big deal. This is not a self-found build. The problem is, typically in a race setting, you will have like an extra half hour to an hour onto the run, simply because Act 3 is very dangerous. You have to take your time, you'll typically be under-leveled going into the zone, and there are a lot of awkwardnesses to it. So this is, in the sake of time and keeping the video under 40 minutes, we do it this way. I just ran past the unique boss. You don't need to kill him. Why bother? He has a lot of life and hits pretty hard. It's easier to just avoid it, especially with a melee build like this that is fairly weak. The sewer entrance in Marketplace is typically right next to the waypoint. It was not right next to the waypoint in this case, but again, 9 times out of 10. Act 3 is a zone of, or an act of things that are almost always true, but sometimes not. Kind of annoying. I made sure to grab the waypoint first, so I can just run in here. grab the bust, and then log out, log back in. I'll be right at the waypoint in town, and I can just resume my journey. Fairly simple. But this time it's going to take a while to find that bust. Any day now. Any day. Be smarter than me, equip a lightning resist ring in there. That'll save you a lot of headache. Alright, now finding the exit to Marketplace can be a little bit of a challenge. It can spawn anywhere. I've had it spawn behind catacombs, north, south, anywhere. But it will always be after the unique boss. Right there I logged out because logging out and logging back in was faster than walking to the waypoint. Cute little movement tricks that you might not have considered. It's always good. This zone is hard. Lightning resist rings. It's very challenging to deal with lightning thorns. It's incredibly powerful. This build that I'm using complements the build that I ultimately plan on using. Act 1 and 2 you can usually get away with running fairly offbeat builds. Hey, ribbon spool. I'll talk more about that later. Fairly offbeat builds. But once you get into Act 3, you really want your spec to start synergizing with what you're running. So, for instance, my spec is going to be an elemental hit wander on this character. So, I have a lot of elemental damage nodes in the build. So, I'm using an elemental cleave build to level up. I'm using a two-hander that's not usual for elemental cleave, simply because Wrath and Anger work incredibly well with two-handers. But I have my reasons for this. This is a Shiver Sting that I'm using. Not too big of a deal. I got the thematic Saltite. I logged out, logged back in. Put me right back in... What is this? Battlefront? Battlefront. So now I have the Urban Spool and the thematic Sulfite. And now I'm going to turn them into the Gemling Queen. Now, you'll notice that I got both of those items before I went around and got the entrance to Solaris. And the reason I did that is so I don't have to backtrack through Battlefront. If I went through here first, Battlefront probably would have reset. I would waste time backtracking and re-clearing through it. The waypoint might put me in a bad spot. This way I save time. And really, Act 3 is all about just saving time. You can get really unlucky RNG in Act 3, where like everything that is typically true isn't, and it just kind of screws you over. You can have the Marketplace sewer spawn all the way on the other side of the map from the waypoint, which has happened before. It's kind of annoying. And all that stuff. But typically, the hard part is the monsters that deal a lot of damage and have a lot of life. There's a really huge skill jump from Act 2, or a really huge difficulty jump from Act 2 to Act 3. So, make sure your character is aptly prepared. Make sure that if you experience a lot of desync, that you have a lot of health to try and counterbalance it. Make sure your spec is in order, and make sure everything's fine. Other than that, as far as Solaris goes, the entire zone is incredibly large and windy. There aren't a whole lot of ways to get around it other than just exploring everything and figuring out what is or isn't right. Typically, though, killing every rare or unique monster you come into contact with, barring things you know you can't kill, is a good idea, because Act 3 really does need pretty good gear to be able to complete, and you will usually get a lot of it from Act 3 itself. So, that's always good. I get both my quest rewards. I've done them both. I did them all before I went there. I don't even have to touch Battlefront now. It can go away forever. I hate that zone. And now we're running through sewers. Same old sewers. Lightning resist rings help. Hey, there it is. Jumpers, kind of annoying. But, you all know the sewers. They're all so fun. The exit can pretty much be on any outside edge. So, just gotta explore. It's an adventure. An adventure that only ends in disappointment. This is kind of boring. Other than that, the next zone is also a little frustrating. You have the old archmages that are really, really annoying and have the ability to shock you, in addition to really, really, really hard-hitting shield charger mobs. And the entire zone is basically a death trap for melee, and really, really scary for range too. And you can't really run through the zone either because the mobs charge. So your options are kind of limited. You can kind of just blaze through it, but Shield Charge has some really awkward issues with desync where you'll probably just get hit anyways. So it's kind of a finesse zone. You kind of want to keep your potions up at all time. You don't want to rush things. You want to play it safe. Unless, of course, you're on softcore, in which case you probably just don't care. But hardcore... It's one of the zones that you have to consider most when planning something. Like, typically, I'll try and have 1k health going into this zone, minimum. And actually kind of wanted a little bit more, but I completely forget that this chest is higher level. Typically, I will pick up a lot of blues in, like, a race setting here, and I do them, but for the sake of speed, I didn't. Just because I wanted to keep the video under 40 minutes. You know, I'm sure everyone understands that. It takes a long time for me to render, and it takes a long time for me to upload if I don't. But, oh well. Keeping your gear up to date is important. You'll notice I'm trying to get more life before I go into this zone. As I said, it is kind of really, really scary. And you'll see I'm even having a part... These are blue mobs, so obviously I'm going to have a hard time, but... you can always use the get back to town trick for more potions. Town portals, waypoints, they all work. Other than that, simply progressing through this zone is pretty simple. If you find the Scepter of God, you can return to this zone and refresh the waypoint every so often, but it's not really easy to do because you'll be preoccupied. And I just skipped Gravicius. You don't even need to kill him. Why bother? He has a lot of health. If you're melee, he has Molten Shell, and it will hit hard, so why bother? I'm lazy. It's also not worth it. This zone is the exact same as the previous zones, but instead of Archmages, you have these fantastic guys who cast Temporal Chains. Great. Other than that, this zone is a lot more straightforward than its Solaris counterpart. There's not a whole lot of windy alternative passageways. The roads are pretty straight, except for the very last zone, which is not the case. That zone is incredibly annoying. The thing to watch out for here is vulnerability and unrighteous fire, and Cole. You can skip Cole. Like, you should skip Cole. Nobody should fight Cole. But the problem with vulnerability is it increases dot damage, and unrighteous fire for some reason is considered a dot. I love glitches. And that will hit pretty hard if that happens to you. So I definitely suggest running a fire resist ring in levels 2 and 3 of this zone. Other than that, general tips for this zone. The exit is always on the outside of the zone, so hugging a wall will get you there eventually. The only problem is the zone is huge. Like, ridiculous. You can explore half the zone and then completely miss the entrance. Explore the other half, completely miss the entrance, then have no idea what you missed. So it's ridiculous, it's insane. I don't know why it's so big. I think it should be a lot more linear. I understand what they kind of wanted to do, but I don't know. These little, whatever you call these things, the mini turret tentacle monsters, those things, can be a real pain if you get trapped in a narrow corridor. It's typically more of a problem for melee than it is for range, so, you know, understand your weaknesses, understand what you have to deal with. Don't get caught in a bad situation. Fire resist helps a ton for this zone. Don't be like me. Don't not equip a fire resist ring forever. I typically tend to, like, assume that I have things on. Like, I tend to assume I'm playing smart and then just completely not do that. I'm like, oh, I'm taking a lot of damage. Should they buff these things? I'm wearing a fire resist ring. And open my inventory 10 minutes later. I'm not wearing a fire resist ring. I'm smart. But anyways, your basic stuff. Going through, killing stuff. This zone will suck a lot of time out of a run. You'll know you're in the right spot when you find the long, narrow bridge leading up to the set of stairs, leading up to the pile of corpses. And other than that, that'll lead you straight to Piety. Fairly simple. I'm not going to run through the entirety of walking up and around here, because you shouldn't need tips on doing this. Other than like Leap Slam and Lightning Warp can help, but I mean, who uses those? I mean, really. As far as Piety is concerned, when you're talking about gearing up for Piety, it's important to keep a few things in mind. It really helps to have 2 Quicksilver Flasks. Particularly 1 Quicksilver Flask with increased elemental resistances, if you can afford to have one. That's probably one of the most useful flasks you can have, if you manage to get it. And it's not exactly that rare to get. I'll usually accidentally get them while trying to go for movement speeds. Otherwise, you want to have really high cold resist. Really high cold resist. You can typically avoid her fire damage form by having a decent amount of move speed. Like having a second Quicksilver Flask will typically get you out of her fire phase. Whenever you see her go fire, you just pop a Quicksilver and run around. You might get hit once or twice, but it's not that big of a deal. The real problem comes when she enters her cold phase, because she can hit for half your health with max resist. It can happen, and it's incredibly scary when it does. So you'll want Quicksilver Flasks galore, just tons of them. Hey, there's the second one. And the reason you want this is because you'll need your Quicksilver Flasks for both of her phases if your gear isn't amazing. So there's her fire form, popping, running around, more DPS, popping, running around, more DPS. You can hide behind pillars to avoid her ice shot. Highly recommended. Again, multiple Quicksilver Flasks can get you out of the line of fire very quickly. Don't be afraid to teleport back to town. It's better safe than sorry on Piety. In addition, teleporting back to town will remove all of her portals, which is an interesting mechanic. It's not really exploitable, but it's something you can do. Other than that, now that you've killed Piety, grab your 2 skill points. You've already navigated this zone, so that's pretty much all I've got. Hopefully you found the video helpful. Hopefully there were some things you didn't know, some tricks you didn't know. Act 3 is fairly straightforward. There aren't a whole lot of cutesy things you can do, but that's it.